I'm Dylan Anderson. I am a consultant here at CodaBears, and I'm presenting today with Justin.
Hi.
He's over at UFT Industries.
Yeah, I'm technically not even a Epicor person, but I was told to start interacting with Epicor, and I did that through the REST API. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. And me and Justin, so Justin will probably get into it a little bit first about the REST API. He'll be kind of showing you guys Postman and how to configure Postman best for your Epicor environment. And then go into the Epicor Swagger help page as well as doing some git calls, and then I'll take it over from there. We'll get into API keys, access scope, and how to manipulate data using the API using both Epicor's OData and custom methods.
So I'm going to give you a little intro to Postman, which is none of this is technically Epicor specific, and you can use this for all other APIs you want to interact with. But Epicor is a very large API, so there's a little bit of quirks that I've used Postman to alleviate. And then we'll get into some helpful tips more related to Swagger pages that the Epicor shows that can help you understand what you're doing a little better. So this is the first thing. You can download Postman on any operating system you use, and it syncs across. So if you're working from home on your own computer, you can have the exact same stuff you have on your work computer, and it syncs really nicely. So what I first have to do always is I have to turn off this SSL verification because our dev environment doesn't have proper SSL, and otherwise this will become a big block for you. But also Epicor or Postman shows a nice error when you get this issue to go turn it off. And so this is the interface though for Postman. Its main idea is it helps you visualize the HTTP REST calls that you're making, and it gives you some handy places to hold variables so that you can quickly swap environments. And so I will show you an environment here, and it basically gets you a key value pair where you can configure stuff about your environment. So some key ones I have in here is this host, which is like the base host of where the Epicor sits. And then I have a more base URL for the API and where it sits. And I'm targeting V2 and Odata. And then you grab one current company. Since Epicor, even though you can have many companies on one instance, you can only target one company at a time with this API. I then store a username, password, and API key here. Dylan will show you how to configure where you get the API key and its access scope. And yeah, so the next main thing to view is their help pages here. It gives you some good intro information on the security, both a little bit here with the X API key header, and more information down here with like if you choose to go the bearer token way. But the most useful thing is all of these services. They're all kind of their own little API. And so you can search here, or you can go and click on these. These right here are your OData calls, and I will show you some GET calls, and Dylan will show you how to create and delete and alter. But then there's also these custom methods, and you can fully utilize these through your browser if you'd like, but one issue that kind of forced me to using Postman full time was big services like the AP invoice service. If I were to go and click this switch to custom methods button, it would eventually crash my browser. I don't totally know why, because your browser has definitely loaded more information than this has loaded, but it breaks. So I figured out how to very easily import all of those calls into Postman. And it utilizes this URL here. And I have some path variables, which you in Postman denote with just a little colon and the name you want for it. And Postman will go in and switch these values here into this request URL before it sends. So I am able to choose between V1 and V2. I can bring in those custom methods, or I can do Odata calls, and I can choose the service I want. So I will show you an example. I can hit this, and it will bring me in all those custom method calls from the AP invoice service, and it won't crash. So I just click this copy button right here, and I can go import. I can switch to raw text, and I can paste everything that just gave me into here and continue, import, and takes a second. And so AP invoice is definitely one of the bigger ones. The rest go a little bit quicker, but once that is done, I now have this Epicor BO AP invoice service collection. And Postman lets you have more variables and settings at a collection level. And this is one of the quirks about Epicor is a lot of APIs you deal with, it'll just be one collection. All your calls will fit in there and you can organize it nicely. But since Epicor is an ERP system and so much larger, it splits it into many collections. So a few things I do to get a collection ready, and I can do these, and then all these calls will work with that authentication, is I go in here and I switch this to basic, and you can take those environment level variables and you can use them here in the collection. So I can type in username, password, and pull those in. And then the other thing I do, since in V2 you do a basic auth and you have an X API key header, I'll show you two ways you can do this. The slightly more advanced way is you can do a little pre-request script, which is just a little bit of JavaScript. And you can take this and add in an API key header automatically from your environment value right here. So I go and I always add this into the thing here. If it's V2, you only need this first one. And V1, you have to add another header in to show which company you want. So I include that one. So you just go in here, you add that pre-request script, you save, and now all these calls will be able to get that API key header. It will overwrite this one here that Postman imported. You can turn that off if you want. And also Postman will just put a little bit of Latin in instead of knowing anything real. So I can switch this over to the environment variable current company as well. And what's cool about this is you can have your many different environments. Right now I just have one of demo, but you could have dev, staging, prod, and very quickly switch. And I often have like demo FEE is one company, and I have demo FED. And so I can quickly switch between the companies and the calls work. So this get list call, I will show it off. Postman's gonna throw in some dummy data that will act very weird. So change those to more normal, and you get an AP invoice head list. And you could interact with this where clause here, but Odata makes this much easier. So I go here, and this is here as an example of bringing in the API key this way, is you can start interacting with the data. So if I were to just call this with a top 10, just so it's a little bit quicker, it brings in tons of this information. But say you want to only get open invoices that can be paid, and you only care about some of the information. You can do this open payable. You can do an equal operator and say true. And the benefits of using the Odata one instead of the where clause on that custom method is there's tons of documentation on how to write your Odata queries. And this where clause might be a little bit more of a guessing game for you. And then you can also say, hey, I only care about the company, the vendor num, and the due date. And you just do a comma separated list in the select here, and you execute that again, and you just get those few columns. And that is how to import and start using your calls and a few Odata stuff. Dylan?
Alrighty.
Change
So Justin, are you able to pass to? There we go.
I think I just did, yeah.
Awesome. Give me just 1 second here to get my slides up on the screen.
While you're doing that, Dylan,
Yep.
Dave Glezeski had a question on, for folks that are moving to E10 from E9 progress, what would be examples of using REST API? I think Justin just showed you that. You can basically do everything that you used to do with the business objects, you can do with the REST API. So pulling data, not only querying the database, but you can also interact with the Epicor system. For example, inserting an order or doing something like that, you can do with the REST API now. And I believe Epicor is recommending, instead of using the business objects, if you're a third-party developer, to use the REST API, as it will be more future-proof. And it looks like we can see your slides now.
Awesome. And it's the one that's full screen, right? Alrighty. So I'm gonna kind of take it from here, and we're gonna get into setting up an access scope in Epicor. And the version that I'm using for the demo today is going to be Epicor 10.2.700. So some things might look a little bit different, but this should, be pretty standard across the board of Epicor 10. I know that access scopes and API keys were implemented in a little bit of a later version in E10. So if depending on what version of E10, you might not necessarily have these features available. So we'll go ahead and jump right into it. So basically, what is an access scope? Just access scope can be defined in an access scope. You define a list of items that you want your custom applications that are going to be using the API key. You can actually define these on users as well. But the list of items that you can make or restrict to your API keys would be Epicor services and their custom functions. So like on the Swagger page, he was showing you the services. Those are also called business objects. And you can also define what BAQs should be callable from your API key, or what your API key should have access to. And I'm going to go ahead and start demoing how to create access scopes. Let me switch here to my Epicor environment. So here's my 10.2.700 demo today. We're going to go ahead and navigate to the access scope maintenance menu item, and that is going to be in the main menu of Epicor, System Setup, and then under Security Maintenance. And then you'll see a menu item called Access Scope. I'm going to go ahead and click on this. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and click this File New up here and click on New Access Scope, and we'll start defining our access scope. So I'm just going to call this emug demo, and I'll go ahead and click Save. And then, so we have a couple of different tabs here. So this is a list of access scopes. So if I populated more than one, all of my access scopes that I selected from my search would appear here. And services, so this is where you go and can start defining services for your access scope. So we're going to go ahead and define the sales order service for this demo today. So I'm going to go to File and add a new service. And then the one that we're going to be working with in the demo is going to be the sales order service. So I'll go ahead and type sales order and hit search up here. And then I'll select the sales order. Once I've selected the sales order, I can specify which methods within that service that I want to add to my access scope. So there's a methods tab here, and you can see all of the available methods for that service. I'm going to go ahead and go back to File, New, and New Method. And then you can, if you know your methods, you can type them in here and then hit search, or you get it search and it'll pull back all of them. But again, just so you know that it is Epicor, it can be a lengthy search. So I'm going to go ahead and, since I know them, I'm going to go ahead and search them up and add them one at a time here. So one of the methods that we want to use is update ext, and I'll kind of show you why once we get into manipulating data and doing REST calls in our Postman here in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add all my services, update ext, new service. I want to get the get rows method. Oh, not new service, my bad. New method. And we want the get rows method. And lastly, I'm going to add delete by ID. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And we're not going to add any BAQs or libraries, but I'll quickly kind of give you a little bit of rundown. So, BAQ you can specify, because the REST API can actually make calls to a BAQ and get data back from the BAQ. So if you're working on a custom application where you're integrating or using the Epicor REST implementation, then you could create BAQs for this custom application to get its data, rather than going direct to like a SQL or going in through a service. If you want to do kind of like a multi-join BAQ across multiple tables, services kind of puts you in one area of focus. Again, this is going to be what I can access to in the sales order service is all the data related to sales orders. And then libraries. So this is something again kind of new to the later versions of Epicor 10. You can actually define libraries, and you can actually define your own libraries and functions. You can use custom code. It kind of has interface similar to kind of like when you're creating a BPM, but these libraries and functions can also be called from the REST API, as well as customizations and BPMs in your system. So that's something that you should definitely check out depending on what you're creating. You might want to create a function library for your application to call via the REST API to do certain things in Epicor. And once we have an access scope, 1 second, switching screens here. We're going to get into the API key maintenance. I always kind of recommend that you define your access scopes before creating your API key. Just as the process, when you create your API key, I kind of like to, I don't like going back to Windows. So yeah, you create your API key, go create your access scope, then you'll have to go back to your API key maintenance to attach your access scope to your API key. But in this demo, of course, we're going through the procedure of creating an access scope. We've already defined all that we want for our API calls to have access to. So now we'll jump into the API key maintenance, and basically what an API key is you can essentially the idea is, to create one of these for each, custom application that you have. API keys are and use the Epicor inside of the Epicor REST v2. There's an Epicor REST v1 that I believe even in 10.2.700 still does not require an API key. It just uses the basic Epicor login. API keys, also provide an additional layer of security for your application. With that, I mean, you can assign these access scopes to your API keys, limiting to what this custom application has access to, especially ones that you might provide externally or something like that. If you publicize your Epicor REST API, you don't necessarily want to give that API key or your application access to the entire world of Epicor, especially if somebody out there finds a way to manipulate your code to make other calls to get into your ERP data. API keys also can have expiration dates. If you have a use case that requires an expiration date. So let's jump right in back to our Epicor environment here. And we're going to go into our main menu. And all menus here. System setup, and under that same security maintenance is the API key maintenance. We're going to go ahead and open that. And I'm going to go ahead and define a new API here. Again, I'm going to call this emug demo 21, just to kind of difference it from my access scope so I don't get confused here. So I'll call a name, description. You can define that any way you want. This is just kind of for your documentation purposes internally. And then expiration date, again, you can define one. I always like to, set it out real far. And then you can define an access scope. Make sure that enabled is checked. It is checked by default, so I kind of, overlook some of those things. But I'll go ahead and click access scope, and then we're going to pull up our emug demo access scope. And so once I click save here, and I'm only going to, it's going to give you a message here. The API key value to be used in the REST call will display and will be copied to the clipboard. Save or make note of this value. It'll not be stored in the database. So just so you know, once this gets filled in here, when you're creating the API key, this is the only time you can visibly see this. You're not really going to be able to come to this menu. Yeah, this definition key ID will still be here, but then this will be replaced with a bunch of stars, except for like the last 4 characters. So I recommend once you create an API key to save this out to a safe location. Just for this demo, I'm just going to spit it out to my notepad here. And I click save, and I have my access scope. So that is pretty much all you need to create an API key. And next, we're going to use this API key. And since Justin kind of started off with PostMan, I'm going to demo these calls using PostMan. And basically, what we are going to do is we're going to manipulate data with custom methods. And in a little bit, I'm going to show you also how to manipulate data using Odata methods. And real quick, I'm going to go ahead and open up my Epicor REST API. So this is Epicor 10.2.700. I know that Justin was presenting with the Swagger page, which all versions are using, except for 10.2. Well, 10.2.700 has a way to get to a Swagger page, but they've also kind of rebuilt it and created their own REST help page using their new kinetic interface, which I do like. I do like the search in it. You have the same stuff here as you do on your Swagger page. Business activity queries, Epicor functions, BO namespace, library namespace, all that good stuff. So again, the service we're focused on today is going to be the sales order service. And so once you can search like I did, and then it'll pull up the sales order service. Here's a little button here. If you click on that link, it'll kind of show me the old, Swagger layout. It gives me a URL to get this back in JSON that could be used in your Postman if you wanted to use that to get back the full list of calls. There's also a go to help page link here, which is the old Swagger page. And this has all of your available methods for the sales order service as well. But I'm going to kind of stick to the REST API here and show you a little bit. So I added some things to my access scope that I mentioned earlier, and one of them was the get rows service. So depending on what calls you want to make, you're going to come to your REST help page or your Swagger page, and you're going to kind of look through the services and the methods the services offer. So like for sales orders, for instance, if I click on the sales order method here, it's going to give me a get and a post request. And if you look right here in the small text, it calls get rows to retrieve sales order items. If you look there, get rows is the method, one of the methods that we selected. And that pretty much justifies on why I selected that and added it to my access scope, because I might want to make this call using my API key to get back sales order data. And again, like the RESTful API, you can click on one of these, or the Swagger page that Justin was showing you, click on one of these and also do some stuff in your browser. This is kind of an example, response of what it's going to return back to you, the fields available, stuff like that. It has, all the Odata stuff here as well. And up here, it's the Odata and then the RPC methods, which stands for remote procedure calls. I always refer to this because this is how it's been displayed in the Swagger page in all versions of E10 as custom methods. So you might hear me refer to RPC as custom methods, which is essentially the same thing. They've just relabeled it. So if I click on the RPC, again, it shows us the custom methods available. So like update ext invokes the method update ext here. So again, that's why I chose the update ext back when we were setting up the access scope. And again, just so you can see here, you can feed in an API key, company, stuff like that, and actually do those calls. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and jump to Postman, and we'll begin manipulating data using custom methods. So Justin's environment setup is, more uniform than mine. I just got up, quick and going. I'm not really using any variables. But if this was, kind of, if I was using these calls or working on a collection of calls for an application, I would definitely take the time to go ahead and set up those variables so that if I ever, wanted to switch my instance, for example, like if I wanted to, for whatever reason, switch from a E10 train database to an E10 test, I would be able to change that in one variable at the collection folder level, and it'll update all of my requests rather than me having to go and update all these URLs. So that's why it's really helpful to have your environment set up, especially when you're working on a big project. So in this demo, I went ahead and prepared a little bit of some data here that we're going to send to using the update ext and a post request. On my headers tab here, I just want to show you that I filled out the parameters. So the current company that I'm going to be using is Epicor 06, and then my X API key here. I pre-set up an API key, so we'll go ahead and use that, but it's set up exactly the same. And then the authorization I'm inheriting from the parent, and on the parent I actually have my Epicor login stored on this collection folder here. That'll be inherited down for when I want to make REST calls as well. So I have the API key, the authorization is in the parent, here's my body, and again, so you kind of are going to want to play with it. I mean, the REST help page here is very helpful. This is the full example of the input for the update ext custom method. There's if you click model here, It has asterisks of kind of what's required. And you can use this help page. This also does exist on the Swagger page. It's going to be set up very similar. But you can see, get a description. It's like the Epicor data dictionary was exported here. So there's a lot of helpful information to look at. But I played with this in the training database to kind of get the data that is required that I wanted to use. So we're not, as you can see here, I'm specifying a customer number. So I found a customer that I wanted to create a sales order on. I defined a PO number so that we can easily, find our sales order in Epicor if we wanted to look at it. And I'm going to go ahead and click send up here. So it's going to send all of this in the request body call to the update ext method. So when I hit send, I'm going to look here in my response. And so with the custom methods, you get a little bit of additional, parameters. It says, if there's any extension tables, if there was an error during update. But you'll get a pretty much full response of the sales order that just got created if you're using an update ext and you're not defining any type of sysrow ID GUID that, we'll get into a little bit in just a little bit how to update a sales order that you've created. So here's my new order number, so I could pull this into Epicor if I wanted to, and it's been assigned and it exists, and it's going to be assigned to my customer ID too. Entry person, so depending on who you're authenticating through the API as, for me, I'm authenticating as Epicor. It's going to autofill that in as the person making the calls. So again, creating a user for your application as well as the API key is going to both be important so that you can say what application created a sales order rather than using a generic user across all of your custom applications that are integrated with the API. So one thing I'm going to take from this response object here is going to be the sysrow ID GUID. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I'm going to actually update this call using pretty much the same custom method here. So I copied my sysrow ID from the order I just created and then updated sales orders. So again, this is the same method. And then in my body, the headers is again the same API key, current company, authorizations being inherited from up here. My body here, again, I minimized the data set from the sample that I stole from the help page, minimized it to only the fields that I want to use, maybe update or so on, and stored them here and saved it. So I went ahead and updated my sysrow ID here. For this demo, row mod is you. This is an important one. This is definitely signifying to Epicor that we want to update this sysrow ID. And order number, I always like to put that in so I know which one I'm updating. But again, the sysrow ID is really the main field that's required here. And then we're going to go ahead and say, I'm just going to update the PO number on the sales order. So I've gone ahead and fill out my JSON body here, and again, this comes right from your help page. Either if it's the Swagger or the new one in 10.2.700, I'll click send, and I get a response back again with the full sales order data set. And if you look here, so 5398 now has the PO number that we just typed here, and not the PO number that we initially used when we created the sales order. So that's kind of how you can, update and manipulate, sales order data or whatever, service you want to tap into and use using the update ext custom method. Again, another custom method here. We're using the update ext again. And just to show you, 5398 is our sales order. I'm stealing that from my other request, 5398. Again, I always like to put it here, just kind of signify me. But again, sysrow ID is the main field required. So let me go ahead and grab the sysrow ID again. It's no longer in my clipboard. Here we are. So I'm going to put the Cicero ID in the body for my, again, it's another update ext method request. Our method has not changed for the custom method, and then we're signifying row mod D. And so A is to add, U is to update, D is to delete. So with this being my body here, I'm going to go ahead and click send. And it's going to send me an empty data set back. Errors occurred, false, so no errors occurred. There's nothing that we should look at here. And 5398 is no longer in our ERP system. A couple more parameters in the body that I just want you guys to be mindful of, and kind of why I choose to use custom methods a lot. And I personally like to use custom methods more than the OData methods. Is, well, one reason is when you're creating a sales order, you can specify your lines all in one update ext call. Where with the OData methods, I found that I had to go into the order details method to, after I created a sales order header, I had to create an order detail for it. But here I can actually specify everything in my body for the update ext request, and it'll create the sales order header with all the lines. I only did one line for this, and then two big ones that I wanted to show you guys here is continue processing on error. So if for some reason, like line 1, if I had multiple lines here, if line 1 errored out, it would still input line 2 because this is true. If this was false, it would stop processing. And then the other one here is the rollback parent on child. So since this is all in my request, I have an order header, and then all my order lines are down here. If my order line failed, basically, if this is set to true, it'll go ahead and roll back and actually not leave a blank order header out there. Versus if this was, false, if for some reason, I didn't specify a line description, if this was a part on the fly and a line description is required by business logic, it would probably just create a order header with our sales order without any lines to it. And that's why it's kind of good to have the rollback. And again, this is available on custom methods. And again, why I kind of prefer custom methods than any version of 10 to use versus the OData methods. But if you're interested in using the OData methods, I'm going to go ahead and jump into demoing the OData method here. So again, my headers, for Epicor 10.2.700, it did give me the option to specify an API key. For V2, this is going to again be true. Elsewhere, unless if you're using version 1, if you're using version 1, API keys weren't required at that version. So version 2, and we're tapping into the sales order service here, and we're doing a post request. And so again, I minimized the body and I changed it up here. I stole, again, this sample. So these samples look a little bit different than the custom methods because they require, a little bit different of a schema, JSON schema for the body call. So I copied everything from that help page, from the sales order method. For the sales order post method, there's also a get method in there which returns back data, but we're using the post one to create. And I minimized really just what we needed. So again, we're going to create a sales order with this PO number assigned to customer 2. So I'll hit send again. And again, this is using the OData method, so it sends me back a full response. And you'll notice here, as I was mentioning earlier, that this is just order header data. We would do an additional call to add order lines, but for this demo, we're just going to kind of simulate the creation. So that's how you create using a OData method versus a custom method. And I'll jump over here to update a sales order, my body. And again here, so kind of just like, I'm going to change this PO number here because I've created a few other samples out. But just like the other one, we have to update our body. Cicero ID, I'm going to snag it from the response from the guy that we used to create the sales order. So we're going to update the one we just created, Cicero ID. So I'll grab my sister ID here, and I'm going to paste it into the request here. I have to update the sales order. Again, it's the same post request for sales orders. When you specify a sales Cicero ID here, it's going to, look for the sales order when you make the call. And again, I like to specify the order number just so I know what I'm calling. Again, it's not required. The main required field is going to be the Cicero ID. So I'll hit send. And so now our PO number is emug Odata demo. We just updated that PO number. Using another post request and defining the Cicero ID that we wanted to update on the sales order method. So now I'm going to jump over here to a delete a sales order. So in the Odata method, you can actually do a delete request. Again, you'll find these under the sales order service on the help page. And this one is a little bit different here. So we can feed in some of the methods that are OData methods, we can actually feed in using the URL parameters rather than a request body, which is typically what we've been doing here. And I'm just going to steal this PO number. And basically, the syntax for the URL is the company, comma, order number that we want to delete. We call it delete to the sales order method here with these URL parameters. So once I hit send, for the Odata method, it returns back nothing, but the sales order did get deleted out of the system. And that will pretty much conclude my part of the presentation. And we're going to leave out the next, what we have, like 8 minutes here for questions.
So we got a couple questions here. Adam Johnson asked, is there a way to force REST v2 or turn off v1? And Adam, I will post and send it to everybody here. On Epi users, there's actually a question about that, and apparently they added a web config key that you can use to require the API key on version 1. And so if you're not sending the API key on version 1, then obviously nobody can get to the version 1 step. So that's how they're recommending to do that. Laura Peppel asked, what's the difference between V1 and V2 REST? They're currently using V1. Is V2 better? Justin and Dylan, do you guys have a preference?
So I'll go ahead and answer that one. For my opinion, and Justin, if you want to chime in after that on your opinion, feel free. So V1, V1 doesn't require an API key, and again, kind of what in my preference of using V2, there is a few new things about V2, like you can call in version 10, you can in earlier or later versions, you can actually use and call those Epicor functions and libraries that you create custom. So similar to like you have custom BPMs, BAQs, customizations, you can now define your own C# library that again has a similar interface to a BPM that does certain things. So you can actually go ahead and create some complicated functions that might do something extra and call those with Epicor REST v2. So features, there's more features to v2, and that's kind of what I've seen Epicor kind of update a lot. Again, another thing about V1 versus V2, V1 again is they don't really require the API key. I am a strong promoter of the API key and the access scope feature that is available for V2 because it's all about security. Even internally, I do recommend only exposing your custom application or API to what it needs. I don't really like leaving doors open kind of thing. So for security wise, that's kind of why I like V2 better. The Epicor user that I'm using to do the basic auth can have all the privileges in the world, but if my API key has an access scope, within that access scope, that's all it has access to.
Yeah, that's what I like too. Go ahead, Justin.
I would add one small thing is V2 is on Odata version 4. So that has a little bit more. You you can manipulate the data on the request so you can choose what you get back. But personally, I don't know if I'm using many of the features that are even available in V3. I'm probably using Odata features that have been around since V1 or V2. So that's not a huge thing, but it is a plus if that's useful for you.
Yeah, I really like the API key access scope. It's not so critical when you're working with your own development, but if you're going to have an outside party develop software for you, by giving them that access key, or the API key, that's attached to an access scope, and you can say you can only get to order entry, you can only get to PO entry, you can't get to anything else in the system. Whereas in V1, if they've got a username password, whatever the user can get to, they can get to. The other thing being, if you ever terminate that relationship with that developer, you can go in and terminate the access key or the API key. So you can just say it's no longer enabled, boom, whatever code they wrote for you can no longer get to your Epicor system. So that security and the instantaneousness of it to be able to turn it off is really good about version 2. If you're not going to need that security, version 1's great. But that's why I would choose to use version 2 as well.
And since you mentioned providing API keys to vendors, again, you can set expiration dates. So let's only give the vendor, a month to work on this. Let's set their API key to expire in a month, and then whenever they send you the application, you can swap the API key with something that you know and trust, and know that nobody else has that API key, and they can just tap into your system whenever they want.
Okay, we've got a question from Sang Nguyen. What is your recommendation for the CORS, that's CORS, setting in web.config for REST API? Currently, we have the wildcard, meaning the star, the asterisk. Justin or Dylan, are you guys familiar with that setting?
Yeah, well, so I'm familiar with the general CORS interaction with stuff. So CORS is generally only used if you are going to be calling the REST API from a browser. And that you would have to have that type of star. You probably could limit it to only I believe it's a semicolon delimited list of basically the URLs that are going to be calling it, but your security should be more on the API key side than necessarily host. If you're relying on the host as your security, I would caution you against it.
Okay. There we go. Sorry, typing your answer in to get to that person. Okay, Dylan Green. When creating the access scope for a BAQ, is it recommended to limit it to only get line methods? Dylan or Justin?
So in the access scope for the BAQs, you can define that BAQ ID in your list.
And he's asking, is it good to limit that to only the get line methods? Or do you only have access to the entire BAQ? It's not like you can, if you define it as an updatable BAQ, you'd be able to update, but if it's not, then all you'd have would be the get lines, right?
Yes, I believe so. Justin, do you have any input on that, or?
Well, if you define it to just a BAQ and you add no other methods, I believe the BAQ can call the get, like the BAQ is just querying the data. It doesn't have any other security attached to it really. Does that answer? I don't know.
Dylan, if that doesn't, or sorry, Dylan Green, if that doesn't answer your question, let us know and we'll follow up on that too. Joe DeWitt, how do you know which fields are required to send back in your data set?
So I mean, if you go into Epicor and create a sales order or an invoice or whatever, just kind of think about what fields the interface is making you fill in, because it typically it follows the same business logic in the REST API. So whatever you're not filling in that the interface would require you to, it's gonna let you know in the body here as well when you send that request. It's gonna return a response back with the error. So sometimes, I mean, I do. There's not really, documentation on exactly, what's required besides those little asterisks. Just kind of put it on this help page here, for example. Like, this is required. If in the model, it kind of shows some things are required, but you'll find out as you're, start, using Postman that, Epicor is not telling you if fields required, but the business logic is going to return an error back, and then you just add that field to your data set. Make sure, that's a big use for this Postman here.
Okay, guys. That gets us to our 10-minute mark here. What I'll do is I'll get these outstanding questions over to Dylan and Justin so that they can follow up on the answers. We also have another one from Heather Hahn that I got to get in here. So we will get your questions answered. If people want to take a break right now for the next 8 minutes, we'll start back up at 10. Dylan and Justin, if you guys want to hang out and answer a few more, if that's okay. If you've got to get back due to other duties, that's fine too. If you want to let me know if you want to continue or you guys need a break here.
I can hang around.
Okay. Mark Wansel's got a question. Since Epicor functions can also be accessed via REST v2, is it architecturally better to define your own API and encapsulate all the business logic in the function and reduce the client logic?
So personally for us, I do like to have the logic outside of Epicor in my own application, because then if you're being a good developer, you can write unit tests on that and be a little bit more careful with what you're doing. But yeah.
All right, I'm sorry, it looks like my audio is going in and out. Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So Justin, you were saying you prefer to do it in your own, you do the logic outside of Epicor so that it's encapsulated.
Yeah.
Okay. Get that
This
out.
makes for slightly easier testing. But if it's small enough logic, go ahead and throw it in the function. Keep it in one place.
Okay. And from Heather, once you do your setup and testing of a REST call in Postman, how do you package it up and present it to a user? So she's thinking they have a Service Connect workflow that takes a Excel spreadsheet, uses it to show sales orders. Can or should they change that over to REST calls? Can REST grab an Excel spreadsheet and process it and add the sales orders from the spreadsheet? Let's stop there. Yes, they can, Heather. You can easily do an Excel and upload that, what you're doing in Service Connect. And the next part of her question, can you set up the REST call to listen for this Excel file in a folder? You could definitely write up a file watcher, and there's other programs out there that'll do file watching and they'll call a program. So your program would call the REST API. You would have that file watcher look for that Excel file to be dropped in a folder, and then it could call your program. Does anyone know of any documentation and how to do something like this?
So one thing I probably should have added this earlier is Postman has this like code generation thing. So if you set up your request, you can click this one button and then it lets you choose from a bunch of different programming languages. One of those is C#. I know at our company, we're a C# shop, so you can easily know how to call that REST API from code. And then if you're writing C#, you can basically write that file watcher and then have it interact with the REST API.
And Heather, Dylan sent a example of doing that file watcher that I'll get posted out and doing the Excel, it looks like. So I'll get that posted out. I'll see if I can add your question as a question in chat so that you've got it right away as well. So let me get that up there. I've got all the data.
Brad will post that link, but that's a very helpful video. It's actually by Jose Gomez, who might be sitting in here. But yeah, he actually presented, it was actually on 10.1.500, but how to add an API call to your Excel so that it could pull the data right into your Excel.
I think
and that you wouldn't need Postman or really even custom code.
So Heather, I posted that YouTube link in chat. I'll see about getting that over into the questions as well, but if you need that, it's over in chat for immediately here. All right, we got a couple more minutes we can do. From Dan Doan, can access scope or keys be limited to specific user accounts? I don't think they can. They're access keys. Is that correct, guys?
Yeah. Yep. I mean, you can limit who you give it to.
You can actually define an access scope to a user account.
You can?
The option is there in user account security maintenance. Personally, I've never really tried it, but it is available there. Right on the detail tab.
Okay, it's in the detail tab. There we go. Put that out there. Can you, from Graham Ross, can you set an expiry date for an API after generating the API key?
Yes.
I believe it can be changed afterwards, yeah.
Yep, you can change it really any time. So even after it's expired, you can technically extend the expiration date, and it should let them continue using the REST key.
Okay. And also weighed in on the previous question, there is user account access scope setting, so you can do that. We'll do one more question, and then I'm going to switch it over to Calvin and Bill so that they can make sure they can present. I know I'm sorry if I butcher the name, Mazen Asmar. Can REST APIs be used to add attachments to job entry job? So can you use REST API to add attachments to jobs?
I'm not 100% sure about that table, but I have added attachments and attached it to an object. Yes.
I know, yeah, like Justin's saying, I know you can do it like on the sales order service. You can tap into, it's called like order header and order detail, ATTCH, it stands for attached. So the job entry service might also have similar calls like that and to make attachments.
Yeah, so some services do have a call that you can make easily, but then there's also another like two-step way where you can create a, I think it's like file xref, and then you add in your keys manually to that object and it'll show up in the UI.
Okay, I'll get that over. And the other questions I will send over to Justin and Dylan so that they can respond, and then we'll get answers eventually here, whether that's today or they'll go out in the minutes. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And next up is inventory with Calvin and Bill.